"Can I have dinner with you tonight?" she asked. And I laughed. God help me, I laughed. Because I was a 42-year-old mechanic with grease, worked so deep into my knuckles it doesn't come out at a funeral. And she was the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in a room with candles and a wine list, and men like me do not get asked that question by women like her. So I laughed, the way you laugh when somebody's teasing you. And I said something dumb about how she must have hit her head when the car broke down. She didn't laugh back. She just stepped in close, closer than anybody'd stood to me in 5 years, and she kissed me, slow and sure and not one bit like a joke. And when she pulled back, she said, "I wasn't asking to be funny, Emmett. I was asking because I meant it." That was the night everything I'd bricked up came down. But I have to back up to the Monday her old car rolled into my town on a dying timing belt and rearranged my whole life. My name's Emmett Pruett. I run the only garage in Cades Ferry, Missouri, a river town tucked down in the Ozark hills where the hollows fill up with fog every morning and the whole place smells like wood smoke and wet oak leaves come October, which is when this happened. I've had my hands inside engines since I was 14. My daddy ran the shop before me, and his before him, and every one of us learned the same thing at the same workbench. A man keeps his head down, does the work, and doesn't go bothering anybody with what's going on inside him. My father could go a whole supper without saying a word that wasn't about the weather or the truck. I loved him. I never once knew him. I turned out to be real good at both those things at the same time, which I've since learned is the family curse. I'll tell you the shape of my life before that Monday, and I'll tell it honest. I eat supper alone. Every night, at the counter of the Blue Plate, Ruthie's place, same stool, same time. And Ruthie slides me a plate and doesn't make me talk, which is the whole reason I go. At home, there's a kitchen table my grandmother left me. Good solid oak, 2 chairs, and for 5 years that table's been buried under carburetor parts and mail I don't open. And I eat standing up at the counter off a single blue plate. 1 plate, 1 fork. You only need one of everything when it's just you. I used to think that was efficient. I've since learned there's a word for a man who owns 1 plate on purpose, and the word isn't efficient. Here's the wound, since you'll wonder. I've got a daughter, Birdie. She's 15 now. Her mother Denise and I split when Birdie was 10. No big blow-up, nothing you could point to. The marriage just went quiet and then it went cold. And then Denise found a man who actually talked to her, and I couldn't even be angry, because I understood the appeal. Denise moved 2 hours south to Springfield and took Birdie with her, and I got every other weekend, and somewhere in there I started letting those weekends slide. Told myself she didn't need a grease-stained man in a dying river town messing up the good life her stepdad could give her. Told myself I was doing her a kindness by disappearing slow. What I was really doing, and it took me a long time and a woman with a cello to see it, was making sure I was never the one left standing there surprised. If you let people drift off on their own, they can't leave you. They just fade. I'd gotten it down to a science. I hadn't answered a call from my own kid in 3 weeks. I called that piece too. I'll give you one more thing about my father, because it's load-bearing. The last week of his life, he was in the county hospital, and I sat by that bed every evening after I closed the shop, and neither one of us knew how to say the one thing. I'd tell him about the trucks I'd worked on. He'd nod. And the night before he passed, I stood up to leave, and I made myself put my hand on his shoulder, which was more than the Pruett men generally allowed themselves. And I said, "Love you, Dad." And he looked up at me, and I watched him try. I watched the words get all the way up to his teeth, and then he patted the back of my hand twice and said, "Get on home before it rains." And that was it. That was the whole inheritance. Not the shop, not the tools, the lump in the throat, and the words that never make it out. I swore standing in that hospital I'd never do that to Birdie. And then I did exactly that to Birdie, because it turns out you don't beat the family curse by hating it. You beat it by learning something you were never taught, and nobody in Cades Ferry was lining up to teach me. Then Monday, late afternoon, the light already going gold and long down the hollow, and this old Volvo wagon comes limping up to my bay, making a sound I could diagnose from across the county. Timing belt on its last threads, a hair from letting go. Woman gets out. Dark coat too nice for around here, city shoes, and this way of standing like she'd been holding herself very carefully together for a very long time. And in the back seat, laid across it like a passenger, a cello case. A cello. In the Ozarks. I've seen a lot come through that bay, Never that, please tell me it's fixable, she said. I don't even care what it costs. I just can't be stuck. Everything's fixable, I said, wiping my hands. Questions just how long and how much. I listened to it turn over one more time and shut it down before it grenaded. Timing belt, I can get the part, but not local. Has to come from Springfield. And it's Monday, so figure end of the week. You got somewhere to be? Something flickered across her face. No, she said. That's sort of the whole problem. I don't have anywhere to be. I was just driving to see how long I could keep driving before I had to figure out my life. Her name was Margot. She'd been a cellist, a real one, a symphony chair in a city back east. Spent her whole life playing music other people wrote, sitting exactly where she was told to sit, hitting every note on the page. And 2 weeks back, she'd been 3 months out from marrying a man everyone agreed was the correct choice. Steady, successful, kind enough, when she woke up at 4 in the morning and understood with her whole body that she had spent 36 years being agreeable, being what the room needed, playing the part written for her, and that if she married that correct man, she'd play it till she died and never once find out what she actually wanted, because she'd never in her life asked. So she'd put the cello in the car and started driving west, with no plan but that one, to find out how to want things out loud. Cades Ferry was just where the timing belt gave out. She'd meant to keep going. She didn't keep going. The part took all week, and Cades Ferry got its hooks in her the way it does. Or maybe I did, though I'd have denied it under oath at the time. She had nowhere to stay, so Ruthie put her up in the room over the diner, and Margot took to spending her days at my shop. I couldn't figure it. First morning, she just showed up with 2 coffees and sat on an overturned bucket and watched me work. And I kept waiting for her to get bored and leave the way sensible people do. And she didn't. She asked me things, not small talk things. She'd watch me set a timing mark and ask why I did it by feel instead of the gauge. And when I answered, she actually listened, head tipped, like the answer mattered, like I mattered. And nobody had looked at me like that in so long, I didn't know where to put my eyes. You don't say much, she said, second or third day, from her bucket. Nothing worth saying. That's not the same thing. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. My whole life was people who said a great deal and meant almost none of it. A man who only says the true parts isn't quiet, Emmett. He's just honest. I could get used to it. I dropped a wrench for no reason at all. Blamed the oil. The town, meanwhile, was having the time of its life. You don't get a city woman with a cello stranded in Cades Ferry but about once a generation, and by Wednesday, the blue plate had turned into a command post. Ruthie, who's run that diner 30 years and knows the inside of every marriage in the county before the couple does, took one look at Margot, sitting across from me at the counter, and started humming while she poured coffee, which is Ruthie, for I have seen the future, and it is delicious. Old Denver Pyle, who sits at the end stool and hasn't been wrong about the weather or a romance since Nixon, leaned over and told Margot, "That man's changed the oil in every vehicle in this town, and the battery in exactly 0 of his own dead spots, if you take my meaning." And Margot laughed so hard she about lost her coffee, and I wanted to crawl under the counter, and also I didn't want that morning to end. That's the thing nobody tells you about a small town. Everybody's in your business, because a long time ago they decided your business was worth being in. It's the same thing as love, just with worse manners. Wednesday evening she asked me to show her the river. I told myself it was neighborly. I'm a terrible liar, especially to myself. We walked down to the landing, where the Cades Ferry water runs slow and green under the bluffs, and the whole hollow was on fire with October. The sugar maples gone red-orange, the sycamores dropping their big dry leaves that skitter across the gravel like something alive, wood smoke coming off somebody's chimney up the ridge, that cold mineral smell the river gives off at dusk when the air starts to bite. A barred owl called off across the water, that 8-note question they ask. Margot stood at the edge of the water with her arms wrapped around herself and said she'd forgotten places like this were real, that she'd spent her whole life in rooms with good acoustics and never once stood somewhere the quiet was this loud. And she shivered, and without deciding to bowgee, I took off my flannel and put it around her shoulders, and my hands were on her shoulders for 1 second longer than a neighborly man's would have been, and she went still, and I went still, and the river just kept going by the way it does, patient with the both of us. 6 inches between my hand and the side of her face. I've torn down engines to the last bolt. I could not make myself cross 6 inches. I took my hands back and jammed them in my pockets and said something about the weather turning, which, I heard it come out of my mouth in my father's exact voice. Get on home before it rains. And it scared me so bad I nearly told her the truth right there. I didn't, not yet, but I felt the wall I'd built shift on its foundation, and I knew, walking her back up the hill in the dark with her wearing my shirt, that I was in trouble the good way and the terrible way at the same time. I want to tell you I kept the wall up. I'd had 5 years of practice, but there's a thing that happens when somebody just stays, doesn't push, doesn't pry, just keeps showing up on that bucket with 2 coffees and treats your quiet like it's worth something, where you feel a door you'd nailed shut start to swell in its frame. Thursday evening, she found out I could cook a little, which I let slip like a fool, and she said she was tired of the blue plate, and that's how Margot ended up standing in my kitchen watching me realize, in real time and hot with shame, that I owned exactly 1 plate. 1 plate, 1 fork, a table I couldn't even see the top of for the engine parts, and a whole house that hadn't had a second person eat in it since Bertie was 10. She looked at that 1 blue plate in the drain board, still wet from that morning. She looked at the buried table, the carburetor cores and the unopened mail, and a birthday card from Bertie, 2 years old, I'd never had the nerve to open. She looked at the 2 good chairs, one of them holding a box of alternator brackets like a person nobody expected. I watched her take the whole inventory of a shutdown life in about 4 seconds, and I braced for the thing people do, the soft, sad face, the "Oh, Emmett." She didn't do it. She didn't say anything smart or sad about it. She just picked a coffee mug and a cereal bowl out of the cabinet, set them at the cleared-off corner of the counter next to my plate, and said, "There, now we've both got something to eat off of. It's not about the china." And she smiled at me, and something behind my ribs that had been shut a long time just gave. That was the night she asked me the question. We'd eaten off a plate and a cereal bowl standing at my counter, and it was the best supper I'd had in years. And out of a comfortable quiet, she set down her fork and looked at me and said, "Plain as weather, can I have dinner with you tonight?" And I, being an idiot and a coward and 42, laughed and said she'd hit her head, and she kissed me and told me she meant it. You already know that part. What you don't know is what I said after, when I finally got my voice back, which was the truest thing I'd said out loud in 5 years. I said, "I don't know how to do this." Which I forgot. I'm not sure I ever knew. I let my own daughter fade out of my life because it hurt less than getting left, and I've got a table I can't even sit down at, and you're a whole symphony, Margot, and I'm a man who owns 1 plate. I don't know how to let somebody sit across from me anymore. I lost the knack, and she took my grease-stained hand in both of hers, the way nobody does, and she said the thing I'll carry to the end of my days. Then we'll learn it the same way you learn everything worth knowing, Emmett. Slow, and by feel, and with somebody sitting right next to you while you do. If you've ever forgotten how to be wanted, if you've gone so long being the one who fades out first that you've lost the knack of letting anybody stay, then you know there is nothing on this earth like somebody looking straight at your empty second chair and choosing to sit in it anyway. Not fixing you, just pulling it up to the table. Friday the part came in. I could have made it last. I want you to know I thought about it. Thought about telling her it was back-ordered, buying another week. But I don't lie about parts. It's the one clean thing about me. So I put in the timing belt, and I test drove that old Volvo up the river road, and it ran sweet as anything, and I pulled it back into the bay, knowing the only honest thing left to do was hand her the keys. And right then, of all the times, my phone rang, and it was Bertie. First time she'd called in 3 weeks. And I looked at my daughter's name lighting up that screen, standing there with Margot's keys in my hand, and Margot herself in the doorway, and the whole old terror came up in me at once. You can't do this. You can't hold on to a woman. You couldn't even hold on to your own kid. Better to let this one go now, clean, while it's still just a good week and not another thing you'll fail. And I did the thing. God forgive me. I did the thing I'm best at. I let the call go to voicemail, and I put the keys in Margot's hand and I said, "You're all set. Run's great. You're good to go. Not stay, not don't, not, I have dinner with you every night for the rest of my life if you'll have me. Just, you're good to go." The coward's kindness. Showing somebody the door so you don't have to watch them find it themselves. Margot looked at the keys, then at me, And whatever she saw in my face, she was too kind to name it out loud. She just nodded, slow, and something in her went quiet, and folded up the way it must have folded up 1,000 times before, for 1,000 agreeable years, and she said, "Okay, Emmett," and got in her car. I stood in that empty bay and listened to her drive off down the hollow, timing belt I'd fixed with my own hands carrying her away, and I told myself it was for the best about 4 times, and it wouldn't take. It just would not take. My phone buzzed. Bertie's voicemail. I don't know why I played it right then, but I did. "Hey, Dad," my kid's voice, older than I remembered, careful the way I taught her to be. "I don't know why I keep calling. Mom says I should stop. She says you let everybody leave first, so you don't have to be the one who's surprised, and I should quit taking it personal." A pause, a shaky breath. "But I don't want to be somebody who quit on you just because you're better at quitting than me. So call me back, or don't. I guess you'll do what you do." I stood in that empty shop and I heard my father's whole life in my own hands. And I heard my daughter naming the exact thing I'd never had the nerve to name myself. And I thought about a woman who'd driven 1,000 miles just to learn how to want something out loud, and how she'd finally learned it, and asked me to dinner, and I'd handed her the keys. I have never moved so fast in my life. I called Bertie back first, right there, before I did one other thing, and I said, "Baby, I'm sorry. I've been a coward, and you've been braver than me since you were 10. Can I come this weekend? Can I come every weekend?" And she cried, and I cried, and I'm not going to tell you what all we said, because some of it's just ours. And then I got in my truck, and I drove down the river road like the hounds were after me, because Margot had told me once where she was headed next. The Buffalo, down in Arkansas, a river her grandmother used to talk about, and I caught her at the gas station at the edge of town, filling that Volvo up to leave my life for good. She saw me coming across that lot and she didn't move, didn't help me, didn't make it easy. She'd spent 36 years making it easy for people, and she was done, and she was right to be. She just stood there with the nozzle in her hand and made me cross the whole distance myself. I stopped in front of her, my heart going like a rod knocking, and I asked her the only question that had ever mattered, the one she'd been brave enough to ask me, and I'd been too scared to answer. Except this time, it was mine to ask. "Can I have dinner with you tonight?" I said. "And tomorrow?" "And, Margot, I've got a table I've never once sat down at, and I want to clear it off and buy a second plate and sit across from you at it every night I've got left. I don't know how to do this, but I'd rather learn it slow and by feel, with you sitting right next to me, than be good at being alone one more day. Please, stay, have dinner with me." She put the nozzle back. She was crying and smiling at the same time, that whole symphony face of hers. "I thought you'd never ask," she said. "I thought I was going to have to ask you a second time." And then softer, "You called your daughter first, before you came for me." She pressed her hand flat against my chest. That's how I knew it was real. That's the man I was waiting on. That was 2 years ago this October. The table's cleared off now. Grandmother's oak waxed and shining, and I sit down at it every single night. I, Emmett Pruett, who owned one plate on purpose, sit down. There are 2 plates in the cabinet now, a match set, and a third that comes out every other weekend and half the summers. Because Bertie's here more than she's not these days. 16 now and sharp as her mother, and merciless about my cooking. Some nights Margot plays the cello in the front room with the windows open and the fog coming up the hollow, playing whatever she wants now, no page in front of her, and I sit at my grandmother's table with my daughter doing homework across from me, and I think a man could go his whole life and never once know a supper could be this loud, this full, this unalone. So here's the only thing I've got worth passing down the counter to you. If you've gotten good, real good, at being the one who fades out first, who never gets left because you never let anybody close enough to leave, I want you to know that I know exactly what that costs, because I paid it for 5 years and called it peace. And I want to tell you it is not too late to clear off the table. It's never too late to buy the second plate. Somebody somewhere is braver than you and just waiting on you to answer the question. And if this one sat down in the empty chair inside you tonight, wherever you are, whatever road you're on, whatever table you've been eating alone at, I'd count it a real gift if you'd tell me down below where you're listening from and who it is you'd set that second plate for if you finally let yourself. I read every one. Bertie helps me answer them now. She's better at it than I am. Pull up a chair, friend. I'll see you on the next one.